Paul,
Yes,
can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
How's it going, my man?
Good, man. I like the new haircut.
I had to spruce it up a little bit. My girlfriend loves the Backstreet Boy look.
Yeah.
So I had to make it happen for her. We're selfless people, and at the end of the day, we think of others more than ourselves. But yeah, it'll
No, no,
come.
it looks good. Yeah, it actually, you look a little bit like Bradley Cooper.
Ooh, she was going for. I asked her what kind of look she wanted, and she sent me about 10 images of the same person. This guy, Shawn Mendes. This singer, Shawn Mendes. I'm like, okay, that
Yeah,
speaks
yeah.
to it all. Those are very high standards. Apologies, I'm not him, but we'll make it work.
Well, good. It's certainly better than the hairstyle I have, but that's we've got a few age years there.
Just a tiny little bit, but your youth and everything else is 100% still there. Probably beating me in that front. So, Paul, this is the second time we're doing this. You like
Yeah,
the hot seat so much the first time that we're doing it again, huh?
it's just so good that we needed a repeat.
Yep. There's beauty in discomfort, if you will.
Yeah.
So you know how I like to run these conversations. For those that are going to listen to this video, the first time Paul and I talked, it was within my video series called 30 and 30 on health habits, and we discussed deeply meditation and mindfulness and focused on a serious part of Paul's life that involves those two things. And I think that, definitely carries on with what you're doing right now. You've had quite a journey leading up into that. Um, but really, I think the purpose for us both is to take a bit of a deeper dive into that and to ultimately talk about how that is incorporated to your current purpose of really helping the youth and think about their lives both professionally and personally moving forward. But you know how I like to run things. I like to start from the very beginning. Paul as a fetus, if you will. So why don't we start there? You started off, I think, as a salesperson. You've gotten involved in executive search. You've done some stuff in healthcare. You've owned a meditation and mindfulness practice, a physical a brick and mortar place that in doing that, and now you've done a lot within career coaching. But you started as nothing, and where
That's all do.
as we all do, we all come from the kind of same sort of place, if you will, or just existence, bred from nothing. So where were you born? Tell us about that first second. Where was that?
Yeah. So I don't remember the hospital, but I do remember because my mother reminded me of this many, many times that I was born 22 inches long and 11 pounds, 9 ounces.
No.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. And, they only, I don't want to freak out the audience, but they only had natural childbirth back then. There
Oh
was
my.
no C-sections or any of that stuff.
Oh, your
Yeah.
poor mother.
Anyway, that's for anotve story. And
I've always been like, oh, let's do this in twos. Like, let's get the first half out and
yeah,
like figure out the
right,
rest.
right, right. I'll try not to say any things that we have to completely edit out. Anyway, I grew up in New York City, in what is now called the Lower East Side or Soho. You know it well because I know you're in the Brooklyn area. So I was right across the street, right across the bridge on the Williamsburg side, which was Delancey Street. But so I grew up in New York City. I think it was very helpful to me because I literally learned how to be street smart. Because back in those days, nobody asked you where you were at 10 o'clock at night. You were out playing.
What
And
were those days? Like, give us more of a flavor.
oh man, it
Like
was,
New York is, I think, identified by decades. So be
yeah.
specific.
All right. So I don't want to age myself too much, but I was born in the late 50s. I'm 62.
Hmm.
And, so just imagine growing up being 10 years old in 1968 and we growing up right on the East River and the FDR Drive, Grand Street, you grew up in the streets of New York City. So when I didn't have school, first of all, when I went to school, I walked to school when I
Yeah.
was 7 years old. It was a few blocks away, PS 110. And when the summers came at 8 o'clock in the morning, I was out of the house, and I didn't come back till 10 o'clock at night until I was probably 14. And then after 14, no one really asked what time I came back. So you just grew up on the streets, and you just managed to survive and try to avoid the real not good people. And it was something that was just, I think, very helpful to me, for sure.
And that was normal, right? Like, it wasn't like your mother went through this crazy physical traumatic experience in birthing you and then was like, oh, okay, let's let him go. Like, this was something that like was native to the area, right? It was something that wasn't really, you didn't really think twice about.
Yeah, completely. I mean, look, I was with 20, 30 friends, hanging around the candy store.
Not on phones, conscious of what's going on, very aware.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lesson, MBA in social skills 101, and
Yep.
It wasn't unusual. Now, my parents were divorced. I was 3 years old, so it's a little bit of a with myself and my older brother. So it was a little bit of a different situation in that my mother worked 2 jobs, so she didn't come home till 7, 8 o'clock at night. So my brother and I, my brother was older than me by 2.5 years, had to take care of ourselves. But again, I think it just makes you more resourceful, and there's some good, and clearly there's some not good. But my mother was incredible mother, and raising 2 boys, making minimal wage was quite a task that I really respected her for, and keeping it all together.
Being from New York, I feel like everybody has nicknames growing up. Did you have a nickname? Like rambunctious Paul or
no, just Little Paul.
Little Paul.
Yeah, because I was.
When did you become little?
No,
you started off pretty big. You started off so fast.
No, I was like 5'1" until I was like 16.
So you had a start, and then you normalized, and yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm 5'10" now, or 5'9 3/4. I like to round it up to 5'10".
Sure.
But I didn't really start growing until I was 17. So for those younger people that are out there that think and my son is the same way. I have a 17-year-old, and he was small like me, and he's just starting to shoot up. Now he's 17 years old. And I told him, you're going to grow till you're 20, 21 years old. And he's like, no way. And I go, well, that's what I did. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear your background. I think, for the folks that you're going to be helping now and into the future, like, I want to speak to somebody who has those associated real experiences. If I look at Paul right now, you have a beautiful painting behind you, I see plans, like you're obviously doing extremely well, just like you're well made and groomed and everything, but there's a really lengthy history that people don't really see behind the facade, if you will, right? And I think that's quite wonderful and important to understand just the same. You, after and through that experience, by the way, if you went into Lower East Side or Soho today, it's just, that's why I wanted to understand the decade. It's, Lower East Side still has that kind of latent grunginess, if you will. Right. I just came from there. I used to live in that area as well. And there's character and beauty within that experience. There's still skateboarders all over the place, but completely different world. Soho was like a dangerous place before,
Right.
until like the 2000s, if you will. So to paint a picture for everybody, from that experience, so PS 110, I think you said, through the high school experience, which I'm assuming was in Lower East Side as well, and kind of encapsulating the idea of the mindset of somebody you'd be working with now at this point. You're not talking to just kids that go to Harvard. You went to Baruch College, I believe it was, yes?
Yeah.
Which is
so I went to Baruch College, which is on 23rd Street in Lexington Avenue.
A lot of intramural sports at Baruch College these days.
Say it again?
A lot of intramural sports at Baruch College these days.
Yeah. Though I did play on the tennis team. believe it or not, which was not a good team. Because if I was playing single, I was like number two. You could give you just a somewhat of an idea of how bad the team was.
So what made you go there in the first place? What was your mentality going to Baruch?
My mentality was to go to college. I wanted to be an accountant. I believe that was
Really? In high
yeah,
school?
in through probably most of my junior high and high school, and mostly because the people that I respected said to me, if you become an accountant, Paul, you will always have a job. So I said, okay, sounds good. And actually, I'm really glad that I did it because it really gave me a very good understanding of how to read P&L statements and quarterly statements. And, I worked for a small accounting firm for the first 3 years after college. And that experience was invaluable to me in terms of the other things that I ended up doing in my life, starting businesses and just being really comfortable with financials and numbers. For whatever reason, are attractive to me and come easy to me. And so I enjoyed it, and I got a job right out of school, which was terrific.
So you go through the schooling experience at Baruch. And so you didn't start off in sales right out of college. You started off in the actual like pure sense of a accounting type of role.
Right.
Give me a little bit of a sense of, so it seems like you wanted to do that for a long period of time. Either give me a sense of what was the intentional decision-making process that pushed you into accounting? It sounds like that's actually something you wanted to do for a long time. Why do you then get out of that and decide I'm going to move into this world of sales where it's very different than accounting, where most
Yeah.
sales jobs, you're not just like earning a full-fledged salary in a given year, and there's a variable component to that. It's either like you're either going to do well and make money, or you're not going to do well and you're not going to make that much money.
Right. Yeah, and I think you said it. You said it very well. I did not want to just be behind a desk, crunching numbers the rest of my life, and I have always been able to communicate, be able to get out of trouble, if you will, in my younger days, and it just made sense for me to get into sales. And people who I trusted said, "Paul, you should really be in sales." So I interviewed with a company called ADP, Automatic Data Processing, and they wouldn't hire.
Big glitzy tech company at that point in time.
It wasn't, right. I mean, it was known as a payroll company. Excuse me, as I shut my phone. It was known as a payroll processing company. Now today they do billions and billions of dollars in revenues. And then when I was with them, they were doing about $180 million a year in revenues. I spent 10 years with them, and I was very fortunate to start off as a salesperson and do well, and move up into ultimately an area vice president of sales with the responsibility for close to about 75, 80 people with sales managers. So everything that I learned about hiring, firing, accountability, metrics, public speaking came from the approximately 10 years that I spent in leadership, came from the 10 years I spent at ADP. Working in a Fortune, at that time, I think we were a Fortune 1000 company, was just tremendous, and their leadership was incredible. And I took as much as I could from the people that I worked for, and I was fortunate because I had really good leaders, and I learned a lot from them.
I think there's two things that I take away from your early work experience. I'm somebody who am still within, if I'm looking at the date, the year, still within the first 10 years of my professional existence. And I think what I consistently struggle with at times is that sense of comparison to other individuals. I went to a really great college with people who are making a lot of money right now by virtue of working in finance and some of these high earning industries, if you will. And I view my own kind of experience succession. I worked at LinkedIn for about 7 years. I worked at a hedge fund prior to that. I'm starting a new career in tech, working for a financially oriented company. And I think what I have started to come to terms with is that there's beauty in not having a linear experience. And speaking to somebody who's seen so much and has so much beautiful experience like yourself and is in a position of, I think I would deem you as being somebody who has been successful in their lifetime. It wasn't because Paul just did accounting and stayed with that for his entire life. You have a flurry of different things and experiences that you've participated in that gives you a great frame of understanding with a lot of things, which puts you in a really good position from a career coaching perspective. Do you feel like, did it take you a while to feel that way? Do you feel that way? Were you in a state of kind of panic as you were moving from one industry to another?
I really never was in this state of flux. Probably the only time I was in a state of flux was when I was leaving the world of having a job as an accountant and then interviewing for a sales role and being, rejected probably half a dozen times by the same company because I knew I wanted to be a part of ADP. And then finally, someone just said, because I told them, I said, I am not going to fail you. I'm going to be successful in this role and you should hire me. And ultimately, he did, and it paid off for everybody. So I don't want the audience to think that it was easy. There was a lot of rejection and a lot of disappointments before I got to the role that I really wanted to get into, which was, as I said to you, a pure sales role.
Mm-hmm. So there was a sense of resilience there. It wasn't, to clarify, you didn't interview once at ADP and get the job. You interviewed a number of times, didn't, and eventually did.
Right. And by the way, got rejected by the same company by 5 different managers.
Yeah.
Who now, in 10 years later, several of them were working for me. But I never had any animosity because I don't know that I would have hired myself either back then, for the simple reason that I had no sales experience. So the person who took a chance on me was a guy by the name of Roy Schwartz. He's rest in peace. He was my first manager at ADP, and he just believed that I would be successful. And so I was fortunate to have someone that believed in me before they even hired me.
When you think about intention and the state of being present and making a decision, and I'm asking this question because I just went through this associated process of what my work ideal is, what I truly care about, what I'm going to come back to in my decision making for this job or that job. What was it for you at that point in time that kind of drove you? One thing that really, I guess, sat with me and how you've described your experience at ADP wasn't that you were making a lot of money. It was that you were learning a ton. Was that what drove you in the first place? What was like the one or two things of how you made decisions in that process?
I more so back then than now, and it just comes with lack of experience and lack of maturity at that age. I was highly competitive and very good, and I always did the right thing, but no one was going to outwork me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just put in the hours, and I'm a very highly organized person, and I just put my plan together, and I knew if I stuck with my plan and revised it as I needed to, that I would ultimately be successful. So yeah.
So you had largely a New York mentality, if you will, right? This kind of like dog eat dog, I'm going to make this happen for myself, keep the blinders on, but being very competitive, what have you.
Yeah.
This feels in a bit of stark contrast to some of your mentality today. So again, nothing is linear. You have certainly gone through your own journey. Let's talk about your experience post ADP and post the sales world. Recruitment is certainly very much similar to sales, right? You're selling individuals on potential opportunities and selling companies on working with you for individuals. But there was a point in time where something extremely stark happened to you physically that kind of stunted all of your experience in a way, and I'm sure deterred you in a lot of senses. What exactly happened to you from a physical sense that you can share?
Right. So let me just, because I think this is really important for the audience, I want to tell you briefly what happened after ADP, and then I'll tell you about the health issue.
Of course.
After ADP, a friend at ADP was starting a publicly traded home healthcare company. It was a startup company. I joined them, left ADP after being there for 10 years. And I just really love this opportunity of joining a startup. They had where I was asked to run the Southeast operations as the area vice president. I came in with 3 employees. It was a home health care company, so we provided home health to mostly senior citizens at home. And we went from my division in Florida, we went from 3 employees to 3,000 employees over 7.5 years, and from 0 to $65 million in revenues. And the reason I talk about that experience is because having the startup experience, which is basically having nothing and having to figure out how you put together the business plan, who you hire, where you spend your time, was an incredible experience. So I had the accounting experience, I had the Fortune 500 experience, and now I had a startup company. I did that for 7.5 years. After that, I said, okay, I've been an employee, and I was fortunate to make a bunch of money on the stock options, but I had been an employee my whole career, and I really wanted to do my own thing. So that's when I came up with the idea, after taking an assessment that was a 3-hour assessment in a therapist's office, and then sitting there, it was paper and pencil back then, and reviewing with a therapist, like an HR certified counselor, my results, because I really wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing as in terms of what I was going to do next. And he said, look, Paul, it's very evident your superpowers are communication, leadership, and you should be doing something with people. And here are your options. And one of those options was working in human resources. I knew I didn't just want to be in HR, and I wanted to have the ability to have an impact. And so I started an executive search firm, which was called Answer Quest. And that was in right after home health. And I did that for 18 years. And we were fortunate to become the largest technology search firm in the country, placing sales executives. So our clients were all in big data back then, and it was called big data. I think it's still called big data today. Analytics, the Internet of Things, and anything related to technology and sales was my focus. And that was a great experience. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't scared, because I was, but I just knew that if I just stuck to my plan, I did the right thing, that it would ultimately be successful. So I did that for 18 years. I then
2 questions, just interrupt you really quick. Do you remember what the behavioral assessment was? Was it a behavioral assessment?
Yeah. It was called the Highlands Ability Battery. Highlands.
Highlands. Okay. There's a lot of them. That's okay.
Yeah, and there's thousands of them.
Yeah.
Thousands of them.
And in taking that, and I think it sounds like you did that on your own volition. That wasn't something that was given to you by somebody. It was a part of your decision-making process to potentially start this new company. Right. So that's interesting. I think a lot of young people conceptualize the idea of being an entrepreneur, doing something new from scratch, as something that only the young do, and that in your experience, like, you weren't in your 20s anymore and you still decided to go off on this venture. I think one thing that I've kind of started to not stunt myself on, but really understand is there's a lot of value in learning the requisite skill sets that are going to be necessary to eventually do something like that, you know? And if you're doing the right things, then time is certainly on your side from like a health habit perspective and what have you. And it means that you give yourself a better chance to potentially be successful. And then at a certain point in time, there's no like right chance to start something and take a deep dive into the risk pool, if you will. But I wanted to call that out because
I appreciate
yeah,
that.
you starting as this entrepreneur, you've joined companies up until that point. Starting something on your own was not in your 20s, but you gained all of these associated skill sets to really understand one, what you're about, what your superpowers are, and two, you had the understanding from everything you had learned to really know that you had the skill sets to do this. So, um, yeah, I think it's really valuable for people to understand that. And then what happened?
So 10 years into running my executive search business, I was fortunate. I had great team mates and practice leaders, and I just woke up one day and lost my voice, and got it back a few weeks later, and then lost it again, and I never got it back. And it's something, I don't want to bore the audience, but it's something called spasmodic dysphonia, which is when your vocal cords spasm. And so this voice that you're hearing today is probably 80% of the voice that I had
Mm,
prior to this situation. And so when your vocal cord spasm, there's no voice coming out, or a very low voice. And I
you
was
could try to speak, but you could actually like you physically try to speak, but just nothing would come out.
it would be sort of like so,
Right.
yeah, and in some ways it was really good because people had to get lean in to really listen to you. So I noticed in that people really listened to you and watched your lips move. And so there was an advantage to people listening to you much more closely,
Really.
because it was hard to hear the voice coming out. Anyway, long story short, I was misdiagnosed with all kinds of stuff for a year until a speech therapist said, "Paul, you have spasmodic dysphonia, and you should, look into it. There's nothing else wrong with you. That's what you have." And again, I was lucky to have people that I didn't have to be in the office every day leading my team. And I had an operation in UCLA Medical Center, and they basically took a nerve out of my good vocal cord, transplanted it into my non-working vocal cord, and it's incredible. In 3 months, just like a root of a tree taking hold, it reconnected the nerves, and in 3, 4 months, I had to learn how to speak again. But in 3, 4 months, I had the ability to speak again. Because
Wow.
for 2 years, I was compensating for not being able to speak, and so I kind of had to learn how to speak all over again.
Outside of the medical marvel and you actually being able to do so again, I want to ask two questions related to your actual experience through that time period. Um, in lieu of not being able to speak in the business, how were you able to function? Is my first question.
And it was horrible.
Were you writing things down?
I was, but talking to in my business, talking to CEOs, and being in the executive search business, you don't typically see the people that you're working with because it's all over the phone. This is prior to Zoom and all the other video options. So um, it was awful. I mean, people constantly said to me, "Paul, I love you, but I can't hear you." And so I had to do a lot of what I did by email. And I was very honest with people. I told them what my situation was. And I just really delegated a lot of the things I would do on a day-to-day basis to my people that I trusted to do their job. And, I kind of did everything I could that was nonverbal. But, the day-to-day meetings I couldn't run for obvious reasons because I couldn't speak. I was always at them, and if I needed to communicate, I always had a flip chart, which I like anyway, but I really like flip charts then. And so if you ask me, Paul, if you could do this all over again, would you have the same situation? And the answer is yes, I would, because it's that experience that really, really allowed me to slow down and just start to experience this humbling that I probably needed to go through, that I never would have experienced had I not gone through that. And that ultimately led me to practicing meditation and mindfulness, which I ultimately brought in to my office. And that changed my life from so many perspectives.
I think the idea of trauma that occurring to somebody either does one or two things. It either debilitates that person to a degree where they absolutely can't function about their daily lives, or eventually the individual is able to pull out of the associated mental state with help and use that as their superpower in a way. You mentioned that you found mindfulness and meditation and that helped you. So it feels like that was the external superpower that helped you kind of understand with your psyche, your means of that you're going to be okay. How did you find it in the first place though? And give us a sense of, beyond finding it, what were the actual tangible ways that you're able to use that at that period of time to be better?
So, as you would imagine, I had a lot of downtime, and I was inside of me.
Or quiet time?
Quiet time. I was
Sorry.
and downtime, and quiet time, and I thought I was literally going, like my mind was all over the place. So even though I couldn't speak, my mind was all over the place, and I needed a way to calm myself down. And I just went on. Remember this very clearly, going on Google and just researching meditation. I knew I didn't want it to be a religious affiliation for me. It was very important that it was secular in terms of my learning. And I found this was the first book I ever read, which is Wherever You Go, There You Are by Jon Kabat-Zinn. And what I loved about this book it had nothing to do with religion. It simply had to do with some beautiful meditations and stories about how to meditate from a basic, fundamental beginner standpoint. And this book literally changed my life. And I started to meditate every day and get frustrated because I thought I couldn't do it, and I could stop it and go back to it 3 weeks later, and stuck with it over a period of a week, and then stopped because I felt like I wasn't doing it well, which is really the opposite of what you're supposed to be doing when you're meditating. You're supposed to just accept. Now I've learned this over almost 8 years of meditating, that there's no good meditation or bad meditation. Any time you sit and you take the time to be quiet for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is a powerful experience. And it was life-changing for me because I became a better listener. I became much more compassionate, much more patient, understanding, and most of all, happier and much more clear on just day-to-day decisions, that I was able to be grounded and have clarity. And I felt if I didn't know what decision to make, and we're not talking about what I was going to eat for lunch, we're talking about big decisions, I just sat and got quiet for 5 minutes, and I didn't always get the answer after that, but more so than not, a day, 2, 3 days later, the answer came to me. But I knew it was the right answer. And it didn't always work out, but it worked out many more times than it didn't.
So you mentioned that you became a better listener, you became more compassionate, and you became more patient. It seems like these are things that, understanding your background and what you were doing prior to this, you had all of these New York kind of based traits, the go-getter, the competitive, having the competitive edge. And these are softer things that we're now hearing from a lot of executives of being some of the most important components of their success. I know that I have certainly experienced that through the leadership that I've been able to follow and have been blessed to work under. The state of compassion. I think compassion is a word that's being used more and being focused and studied more on today, which is super important. For those that heard and saw, Paul, if you want to hold up the book one more time, wherever you go, there you are, Jon Kabat-Zinn. This is not like some Joe Schmo dude. This guy, right, founded MBSR,
Right.
mindfulness-based stress reduction therapy, and I think there's probably like thousands upon thousands of practitioners within this specific space, uniquely, that it's largely a serious practice with weeks of courses to be able to be an accredited individual to lead these practices that really helps a lot of individuals. So he is really the father of that. I'm going to read that book, After the Untethered Soul, which is something that you have recommended to me from our first conversation.
Right.
How did, really quickly before we dive into a question about mindfulness that I want to ask you from your experience, what about this book moved you? How did you find this book?
I don't remember, but someone recommended, Paul, you need to read The Untethered Soul. And The Untethered Soul, I think it's written by Mickey Siegel or Mike Siegel, right? Is that who it is?
Yes, sorry, I covered that up.
Right? A singer, right?
Yeah.
And that book is basically, in a nutshell, about all the thoughts that you have in your mind and all the chatter is mostly bullshit. And it's mostly negative. And if you...
Not you.
Sorry?
And it's not you.
It's not you. It's not you. And if you had a roommate, right, and it talks about that in the book, that treated you the way that your mind talks to you, you would move out as quickly as you can. And so The Untethered Soul is about being able to separate, untether yourself from the voices that go on in your head, to stopping them and being aware of them, which is where mindfulness and meditation comes in. So you can remove that from what you're doing and get back to being present and focused on what you're doing, as opposed to listening to all this bullshit that's in your head.
So I'm 2 chapters in, and I'm entirely moved by that exact premise of the book, right? I think it really lays out the premise from the really start. And I had a hard time on a couple of pages because I realized I was underlining everything. I'm big on being an active reader.
Yeah.
And I was completely blown away, and I still find myself every single day. I'm kind of reading like 4 books right now at the same time, but I still come back to that every single day as I kind of find my mind wandering, especially within our current time of COVID. One thing that I have learned about mindfulness, and specifically when we were talking about mindfulness meditation, the definition of mindfulness, I think, it is a buzzword. Most companies have incorporated it into some sense into either their wellness stipend or what have you, or in speaking to their employees of how to just be more present. One factor of the underlying definition of mindfulness that I didn't really understand before really taking some deeper stock in it is it's about being present, right? It's about being quiet and present in your current state, but it also incorporates, and what's super critical and very different than what people might not acknowledge or realize, it's doing so with acceptance and lack of judgment of self. And so I can imagine that with your experience in that state, with having a really successful business, not being able to speak, and practicing that. It wasn't just a matter of being present, but I'm sure it took some time to get to a place where you lacked judgment towards you in that given experience. What has that journey been like for you, that state of lacking judgment and acceptance?
Well, I mean, I think you said it very succinctly in that it's about being present and aware and not being judgmental about yourself and about others. And when you can do that, you can just have a lot of clarity and a lot of peace in your day to day. And you're still going to get interrupted by thought. This is those things are going to happen, but by being better skilled, if you will, at being aware and catching yourself when your mind gets busy, you can catch yourself and stop yourself and get back to the present instead of worrying about future or thinking about the past, because those are things that take you out of being present. Now, I have 5 minutes before I have to get on a call. So
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you that so that we talked about whatever else you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So, wow, this is the nature of Paul and my conversations in general. I think time passing fast. Let's kind of end with the idea of what you're doing right now. So you started a meditation practice. It was so profound in your life that you decided to bring that to the masses.
Yeah.
But your focus now is kind of marrying the notion of how important mindfulness is and in helping the youth and figure out their associated career paths. So how does the two really blend in together? And I guess to that, is that what you would consider to be your true value prop and your differentiation? Because there's a lot of career coaches out there. Is that really your approach with your existence and purpose today?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good career coaches out there. I blend mindfulness, getting present with technology so we can utilize this particular assessment that I am extremely impressed with, the Highlands Ability Battery. And half the challenge is slowing it down enough to speed up to eventually where you want to go. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but my life now is doing what I've always done, but doing it as specifically a career coach to rising college seniors as well as early career individuals. So we describe them as people with I describe them as people less than 10 years of work experience and going through a 5-step process from the understanding what your true superpowers are, because we all have superpowers and those are our natural innate talents that we're just good at, and really understanding what they are, because when you work in your innate superpowers, assuming you have a good leader, you're going to be much happier and you're going to be less stressed. And the more you can work in your superpowers, the happier you're ultimately going to be. So it's a 5-step process. First is as this mindful career coach, as I like to call myself, it's first identifying your superpowers. Step 2 is building your infrastructure of your toolkit, which is the resume, the cover letter, the elevator pitch, the references, all those things that you just have to have. What your LinkedIn looks like is extremely important. If you're not on LinkedIn, you're essentially a ghost in the career world. So we spend a lot of time on your personal branding. We call it your personal brand DNA. The third step is using LinkedIn is extremely powerful to build out the plan, staying away from human resources and the ATS, applicant tracking systems, and then using LinkedIn to identify. There's 1 million+ jobs on LinkedIn, And there's certainly a job that fits everyone. It's a question of finding that job without going through HR, because there's 500 other people that are doing that. And what I coach my clients on is how to get around HR and get directly to the decision makers, and how to build a plan. And we use a really good accountability tool called Trello. Which, you may have heard of. Simple, it's easy. We both can look at it at the same time. We speak at least 2-3 times a week. I do with my clients via Zoom. The fourth step, which is the most time consuming, is the art of the interview, which is critical because you must be able to outshine, outperform your competitors. And there are so many people so good at what they do, but they just don't do well on an interview, and that's a shame, and that shouldn't be. And there are others that do really well on interviews, don't have half the skills of the other individuals. So we spend a lot of time doing mock role playing of interviews and going through all the questions on video, because the majority of videos, as you know, today are going to occur on majority of interviews are going to occur on video. And then the fifth step is choosing the right job and the right leader and the right company. And so we go through this entire process. It's over 6 months. Generally, most people will find a job when they're making a change between their second and their fourth month. That's what I've experienced. But I'm with my clients 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. And sometimes we talk 3, 4, or 5 times a week. Sometimes we talk once a week. Sometimes we talk once every 2 weeks. It really depends. And then there's the onboarding phase, which is extremely important. I know you're going to go through that in the next week. So I hope you call me and you ask me for some suggestions, because even someone experienced like you with almost 10 years of work experience, what happens in those first 30 days is really critical to how people experience you and accept you or don't accept you.
Yeah, especially in this remote setting, for sure.
Especially in this remote setting, right?
Yeah. Well, Paul, I know you're running now. I appreciated this and found as much value in this conversation as I did the first one. You're building out your Instagram, which I think is Paul Allen Career Coach.
Yes.
And your website, as I understand it, is paulallencareercoach.com.
Right.
So if you want to get in touch, that's probably the easiest way. Anything else you'd like to mention in terms of contact with Paul Allen?
No, I think that's it. The best way to get to me is through my website, and it's Allen, by the way, Allen. That's my middle name.
Yep.
Or you can find me on Instagram, as you said, at Paul Allen Career Coach. I'll always respond. Whether or not it's a good fit for both of us is something we'll figure out. I always do a 30-minute complimentary consultation call on Zoom, because I really truly want to understand what it is that the person I may be working with wants to accomplish, and whether or not I can be of help. Because sometimes I'm not going to be able to be helpful, so there's no sense in wasting their time and my time.
Great. Well, this certainly wasn't a waste of time. I appreciate it as always. Have a great call. I know you're a busy guy. You're very wanted, and it's very evident from the conversations that we have as to why. And I think that all comes back to your intention first, your journey, the purpose that you've had, and what you're doing today, and certainly involving the state of mindfulness within this entire practice. And thank you so much, Paul. Have a great call. That's a wrap. You're out of the hot seat, and we shall talk again very, very, very soon.
Good luck next week on your onboarding.
Thanks, man. Yeah, Thanks. We'll definitely reach out.
You too.
Later.
You too.